name is Carla, and I'm a social media intern for Families for Depression Awareness. And today I will be interviewing one of our teen speakers, Elizabeth Keeling, on hard to treat depression, also known as treatment-resistant depression. So Elizabeth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, and I've been speaking for the Teen Speaker Program for Families for Depression Awareness since August of 2015, so a little over 5 years or so.
So for our first question, I'm sure a lot of people don't understand the term treatment-resistant depression and think it means a person that resists treatment. So can you explain what exactly that is and maybe include examples if you're comfortable?
Yeah, I can understand that just because the name can be kind of like, I guess, deceiving. But basically, I think clinically it's defined as 4 antidepressant medications that haven't worked despite trying them, or 2 antidepressants of 2 different classes. So one being an SSRI, for example, and one being a tricyclic antidepressant not working. But for me personally, it basically means that my baseline is depression. So basically at any given time, and even right now I'm depressed, but that there's periods where my depression gets a lot worse, and it gets to the point where I'm at risk of self-harm. Sometimes I've been diagnosed with psychotic depression in the past, so sometimes psychotic symptoms will arise again. And things such as even watching TV is extremely exhausting. Even though most of my day-to-day things, it's hard to keep motivation, but again, it's like a lot more severe during certain periods. But yeah, basically it means that I'm pretty much always experiencing some form of depression, but that there's periods where it's worse than others.
So seeing as you've had a lot of moments where, like you mentioned, it can feel worse, what led you to seek help as a teen?
So as a teen, when I actually first started seeing help, it was the result of an anxiety attack that I had in the summer. So it's a little bit different than how things have developed. But yeah, I had an anxiety attack in the summer, and that whole year of 7th grade, because it was 7th going into 8th grade where I had the anxiety attack, I was dealing with depression symptoms, but I actually decided to go to therapy, or requested to go to therapy as a result of that anxiety attack. And then while in therapy, we addressed both my depression and anxiety symptoms. So it didn't necessarily start out with depression in particular, but it was kind of eventually that's what the therapy was for my depression.
I see. So at that time, what treatments did you experience when you were first seeking help, and how did you know that they weren't working?
So it started with talk therapy, and that, again, at first it was more for anxiety. So it did help a little bit to kind of, and I was really young at the time too. So just some of the things that they were saying I never heard of before, like just taking deep breaths and mindfulness and things like that. So that did work for me for a little bit. But eventually, when it came more to addressing the depression symptoms, talk therapy really didn't work because there was nothing in particular that was causing it. And a lot of times, I think, even now, therapists and professionals will make the kind of misassumption that there is always something external triggering your depression, when sometimes it's just kind of internal. And so just talking about or trying to get at, I guess, the cause of what was making me depressed. They'd ask, oh, is it something at school? Are you having trouble with your family? And I really didn't have an answer for it. And that's when they suggested medication, because they kind of figured that it probably was something more internal if there was nothing that seemed to be triggering it. And it worked for a little bit. And it's just kind of been the case since I first started medications, where it would work for a little bit. And by working, I mean that it keeps me at baseline for a longer period of time, and it keeps the, I guess, dips in depression less frequent and they don't last for as long. Um, but yeah, that didn't work. I first started with Prozac, I believe, and that didn't work for very long. I'd have multiple hospitalizations after that because the depression just wasn't being treated. And then they would put me on, or they had put me on antipsychotics to kind of help with that, because sometimes when you mix both antidepressants and antipsychotics together, they can more effectively treat the symptoms. But the antipsychotics would more just zombify me. They wouldn't really actually address the symptoms. Um, so that would basically, it was just either making it so that I was too tired to deal with the symptoms, or it just didn't help at all. And again, to this day, I'm kind of experiencing the same thing, but that's when it first started.
I can imagine it must have felt frustrating to not find the answers. So once you realized that treatment wasn't helping you, who did you turn to and why?
So again, it's still not working today, basically. Like, I still struggle with it today, but I've always kind of just turned to the people that are closest to me, like, so my family, and I have always kind of had a mental health support team, um, and my close friends, just because I want to be honest with them, so that if I all of a sudden am not getting out of bed, or am not even wanting to watch TV with them, or saying, oh, I feel like I'm at risk of hurting myself, it's not really a shock. Like, they're kind of, I guess, clued in on what's going on with me. And just, I don't want to be at risk of doing something drastic either. So I just like keeping everybody close to me as informed as possible.
It's great that you have a close support system and that you feel comfortable communicating with them. And for yourself, how did it feel when you received the diagnosis of hard to treat depression?
It wasn't really a shock. It kind of made sense, and I already kind of knew, just because, like, it's literally in the name, I guess, like, treatment resistant, like, nothing is working. Like, I'm resistant, or my, I guess, brain is resistant to multiple forms of treatment. It was discouraging, because it kind of is, I guess, me admitting, or I guess, like, the whoever diagnosed me with it kind of admitting that it probably is something that's going to be lifelong. But again, it made sense to me, so it wasn't a shock, but it was more, I guess, disappointing.
And I know you said that there is still no treatment, but have you or any of your support systems, such as your family, figured out any strategies or ways to support you since being diagnosed?
Yeah, so again, when I define something, I guess, as working or effective, I basically mean that it's able to keep me at my baseline, which is basically, I guess, low level depression for a longer period of time. And the, I guess, more severe episodes of depression are not as frequent and they don't last as long. And I think I first started with CBT and DBT back when I was 20 years old or so, was when I was introduced to it. And it kind of helps me put things into perspective and kind of, I guess, be less discouraged about the fact that this is probably going to be something I'm dealing with for the rest of my life. It just kind of changes my, I guess, thoughts around it. It doesn't make it go away or anything like that, for sure. Um, and I've had TMS in the past, because they recommend TMS and their, like, alternative therapies like that if medication hasn't been very helpful. And that helped for about a month for me before no longer working. And I want to eventually try to do that again, but there's whole insurance, and that's like a whole another story. But I have done those. Those have worked, I guess, okay. And just talking to other people who get it, honestly, has been pretty meaningful for me. Just knowing that there's other people that know what you're going through and can validate you, and you can validate them. Giving support to others has helped me as well. Yeah, so all of these things can kind of make my depression not reach as low a point as it could. but it doesn't fix it or anything like that. It just makes it more manageable.
And what do you wish that family members and caregivers knew about supporting someone living with hard to treat depression from your own experience?
That they're not lazy and they're not unwilling to get better or unmotivated or anything like that. Some people just don't respond well to treatment. And in my personal, I guess, situation, my parents would kind of blame themselves and think that they were doing something wrong. So to just not blame yourself and understand that it's not your fault. It's just something that happens occasionally. And to just honestly understand that sometimes depression does not get better. And with treatment resistant depression, that's usually the case, but that's okay. I think a lot of the time, just because there is still so much stigma and misunderstanding around depression, and a lot of people correlate it with sadness, that, oh, you can't be sad forever. Eventually, you're going to, quote unquote, feel better. But it's not just sadness. Like, the sadness is a byproduct of what's going on in your brain. And sometimes what's going on in your brain is going to be chronic. And it's like with anything else. It's with like diabetes or something like that. People that have diabetes, the advice that they get is more about like managing everything versus trying to make it go away. And with depression, I think, particularly with treatment resistant depression, it's okay for it to be like that with that too, like just managing it and doing whatever you can to cope with it, even if it is a lifelong thing. It doesn't have to be the end of the world, I guess. Like, it can definitely be something you can live with, even if it's not something that's going to go away.
Great. Thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned earlier about TMS. For people listening that may not know what that is, what is TMS?
So TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation, and basically what it is they'll when you go in to receive treatments, you usually receive, I think, about 20 treatments total, depending on where you go. It can vary, and it's 5 days a week for 4 weeks or around there. But they'll basically wrap a coil around your head, and it'll basically give you really, really rapid, I guess, taps. That, I guess, is what the magnetic stimulation would be on an area of your brain. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's on the right of your frontal lobe. That's known to be associated with treatment-resistant depression, because they think that if depression is treatment-resistant, it's usually not necessarily just neurotransmitter imbalances, but there's certain areas of your brain that have dormant neurons associated with it. So they'll basically apply rapid taps for 2 seconds, and then it'll pause for 10 seconds, and then do it again for 2 more seconds. And it doesn't hurt or anything. It can be a little uncomfortable and hard to get used to, but it's not painful or anything. It's just a little bit annoying. But treatments are usually only like 20 minutes long or so, and they're about 5 days a week. And for like 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. But yeah, it's basically an alternative form of treatment if medications are not working.
Thank you for sharing your story with us and for being a teen speaker at FFDA and being at a place where you can share your experience.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more information on hard to treat depression or other strategies to help a loved one, head over to familyaware.org.